This is Charlotte Talks. I'm Mike Collins. Food is one of the most powerful ways in which people connect. It's always been that way. Food is a shared experience, often a celebration that brings people, families, friends, neighbors, and different generations together. But in the U.S., we seem to be moving away from that tradition with more and more people reporting eating alone. We're going to explore the implications of that in a moment, but we start with the announcement of a new Charlotte mayor. Wile steps down at the end of this month, and that opened the floodgates to people interested in filling out her term. I believe 110 people applied. Charlotte City Council narrowed the field to 5, and yesterday evening they announced their choice. WFAE political reporter Steve Harrison has been following this closely. He joins us now. Good morning, Steve. Who
Good
did
morning,
they
Mike.
choose? Good morning. Who did they choose?
The new mayor, as of next week, will be Rob Harrington. He is 63. He is an attorney, a partner at Robinson Bradshaw. He has a pretty impressive resume. He's currently the president of the North Carolina Bar Association. He has chaired the boards of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Library, the Arts and Science Council, the Levine Museum of the New South. So his name is not well known in political circles, but in terms of the nonprofit world, in the legal world, very well known in Charlotte.
So, as I understand it, they narrowed it down to 5 people, and there was ranked choice voting to do that on council. And then yesterday, among those fives, they cast their ballot for their choice. But it didn't come out on the first ballot. The first ballot, the 11 votes were divided between Rob Harrington and former County Commissioner Harold Cogdill, Mayor Pro Tem James Mitchell, former Federal Reserve Vice President Kerry Cook. But he won the second round. So what does that tell us?
There were, this was a huge struggle for council to get to 6 votes and form a consensus. I mean, they were going back and forth for days. I think they were going back and forth in the hours leading up to the vote last night, as there were rumors and talk of people switching, and people were a little bit unsure as to how it would go. Like you said, 4 people got votes in the first round. No one got to 6. Rob Harrington got the closest to 4, and then in the second round, you had, because you could only vote for 2, you had Dimple Ajmira and Renee Johnson switch their votes from Cogdill, who they could no longer vote for, to Rob Harrington. That put him over the top with 6.
And interestingly enough, State Senator Caleb Tedros was also a finalist, but he didn't get any votes at all, right?
Yeah, I did not get any, made it to the final 5, made it to this lengthy interview process last week. Spoke to council for 30 minutes, but just wasn't able to advance from there.
They did this by paper ballot. Do we know who voted for whom?
I just got an official email from the city where they did list who voted for who at last night's meeting. They voted by paper ballot and then kind of took them into a back room to count them. And it took a long time. It was a little bit puzzling as to, it was 11 pieces of paper. I wasn't quite sure what took them so long. And they didn't announce it at the time, but I emailed them last night, and we do have the official list of who voted for who. So we know who kind of switched sides and where their initial alliances were and then where they ended up.
So do we know what the vote count was, the final vote count in favor of him?
It was 6 votes. So it was 6-5. Wow. Harrington got 6. Wow. Kerry Cook got 5 votes. So it was very close. And obviously that means 1 vote could have switched it and gone the other way. And like I said, they were really deliberating all weekend, all day as to what would happen.
I don't know if you've had a chance to look at this, because you just said it came in a little while ago, the vote tally and who voted for whom, but did they give a reason for their selection, any of them who voted?
They did not.
Rob
I mean,
Harrington?
not only was the vote not announced, council didn't speak. They didn't say, I'm supporting Rob Harrington because of X, Y, and Z. That he reached the 6 votes, and then they took kind of a formal vote, and everyone was unanimous. So officially it will go down as an 11-0 vote, but no one kind of gave a reasoning for why they supported one person and not the other, et cetera. So, I mean, we may learn more in the next few days as people talk, but as of last night, no.
As you say, he's an attorney. He's the president of the North Carolina Bar Association. He's with Robinson Bradshaw. He's a litigator who usually deals with complex business disputes. How might a mayor with that background run city council and help run city government?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, Mike. This will be the first mayor that we've had with no political experience. John Belk
Right.
served from 1969 to 1977. He did not hold elected office before then. And Ken Harris followed him for one term in 1977 to 79. I don't believe he had held political office either. So this is very new. We haven't had this in a long time. I think kind of what's important to remember here is that there's been a lot of angst in the city as to this council has shifted to the left on things like this data center moratorium and the I-77 toll lane vote. I think the appointment of Rob Harrington is being cheered by the business community. I think they feel like that he will listen to their concerns. And it was interesting last night, Mike, we have the vote. Rob Harrington is appointed. He leaves the chamber to go talk in the auditorium or outside the auditorium to reporters and stuff. And he was kind of flanked by the government affairs official for American Airlines, who was kind of acting as his kind of quasi in the moment press handler. And of course, American Airlines and the city are going through this extensive negotiation right now over a long-term lease. So I think the business community is breathing a sigh of relief this morning.
So he's not a politician, and here's what he told WCNC TV prior to his being chosen.
I think I provide a new face to at least the political scene. Not having had political, experience and the things that come with that in the past, and not looking forward to a career in politics, I think bring the breath of fresh air. Hopefully, I could come in and look at things objectively, and as I said a little bit earlier, provide some leadership, some calm, some communication, some transparency. And continue the tradition that we've had in Charlotte of a really good political environment.
And last night, following the vote, he had this to say.
I think we've got an 18-month bridge here that's really important. It is a bridge to the future. I'm excited to be a part of that bridge and to channel the great energy that you see in that room and move us forward.
So Mayor Lyles made affordable housing a primary focus of her time in office. He has said that he too wants to focus on that along with public safety. Did that play any role, do you think, in this choice as maybe a way to honor Mayor Lyles because she is leaving office early? She's not leaving because she did anything wrong. Is it a way to honor her legacy, or is it something else at all?
I think it's probably something else. If you watch the interviews they did last Thursday, where the council members quizzed them, all the candidates for about half an hour, really all five talked about affordable housing. They talked about public safety. There wasn't a lot of specific policy talk difference between any of the candidates. I think one of the things that appealed to enough people on council, I think they hope that Rob Harrington will run a good meeting. I think they hope he will be kind of channel the discussion, move things along. I think they were obviously impressed with his resume, but I think they want someone who can bring some focus to the council, streamline the meetings. And I think Mayor Lyles had struggled with that in recent months. And so I think that was probably as big of an issue as anything.
Mayor Lyles was a five-term mayor. She still is the mayor. She'll be the mayor till June 30th, but she's incredibly popular. I believe she was reelected with 75% of the vote, which is highly unusual in today's politics. Aside from promising to focus on affordable housing and public safety, do the views of Rob Harrington, do we know, align with hers fairly up and down the line?
I think it's safe to say they probably do. Mayor Lyles was kind of that centrist mayor, did listen to the business community, did have their interests at heart. I'm not saying exclusively, but she was attuned to kind of the quote Charlotte way, where business and government work together. So I think this will be a continuation of that. In terms of like specific things like, say, the Interstate 77 toll lanes, that's a really big issue that this council is going to have to decide how to move forward with. It was talked about a little bit in these interviews, and Rob Harrington and the other candidates didn't really give any specifics. We don't know whether he would have, how he would have voted, whether he would have voted to rescind support for the toll lane. So I think there's a lot of unknowns up ahead. And I think it's going to be interesting, Mike, how aggressive, how muscular of a mayor is he going to be? You know, there is a mayoral veto. Would he feel comfortable using that as kind of an interim placeholder mayor? I don't know. We're going to have to see.
I'm assuming that because the mayor doesn't generally vote except to break a tie on council, that she did not vote last night. Was she there last night? And what, if anything, has she said about this election?
She was there. She ran the meeting, did not vote, as you said. And she did, like I said, no one really talked afterwards. It was Rob Harrington has reached 6 votes. Then it was a unanimous vote. And then they just moved on and finished the rest of the meeting. So we haven't heard yet the mayor's thoughts or anyone else's thoughts. But I think it's safe to assume that Mayor Lyles is probably very comfortable with this appointment.
So what do you think her legacy will be?
I think the main thing will be the transportation sales tax that was approved by voters last November. That will build the red line at some point, the commuter train to Lake Norman. I think that is going to happen. The sales tax will probably be one. And then 1A was this real emphasis on affordable housing. I think when the mayor came into office, the housing bond was roughly $25 million. This upcoming cycle, it'll be $125 million. That was the mayor. It was of keen interest to her personally. I mean, it was just something that she was passionate about. And so I think those two things will be the biggest, her biggest legacy.
On the same day that Charlotte City Council chose a new mayor to replace Vi Lyles, a former Charlotte mayor passed away. Eddie Knox died yesterday at the age of 89. He served as mayor from 1979 to 1983. It was, by all measures, a different time in this city. He was born outside of Davidson. He attended NC State University, went to law school at Wake Forest. He had dreams of being a farmer. That didn't work out. But what can you tell us about Eddie Knox?
Well, like you say, he served for 2 terms from 79 to 83. And then he, after leaving the mayoral office, he ran for governor, lost in the Democratic primary. His nephew is Rusty Knox, the current Davidson mayor. And Eddie Knox's 2 terms, I think 2 of the big accomplishments were the city built Discovery Place uptown, and the city expanded the airport at Charlotte Douglas, a new international terminal. I think those are 2 of the things that will be associated and remembered with Eddie Knox. And then the next mayor after Eddie Knox was Harvey Gantt. And so it's that is kind of his role in Charlotte's history.
Kind of a bridge. His law firm, the Knox Law Center, issued a statement yesterday saying Eddie dedicated his life to serving his clients, supporting his community, and building the foundation of what would become the Knox Law Center. His leadership, character, and commitment to helping others shaped our firm and influenced generations of attorneys, staff, clients, and friends. Eddie Knox died yesterday at the age of 89. WFAE politics reporter Steve Harrison with us to talk about our new mayor who was appointed yesterday by Charlotte City Council. He'll serve out the rest of Vi Lyles' term to 2027, and that person would be Rob Harrington. It's going to take a while to get used to saying Mayor Harrington, but I think we'll manage. We have to take a break. When we come back, we will talk about food, about dining together, and the trend that we seem to be experiencing, at least in this country, of dining alone. And it's not a good trend. We'll talk about that in a moment. It's Charlotte Talks on WFAE.
On the next Charlotte Talks, fewer than 6% of American physicians identify as black, but the census shows roughly 12% of the U.S. population is black. Some experts say that disparity is one reason communities of color tend to experience worse health outcomes in the U.S., like high blood pressure, shorter life expectancy, and higher health risks during childbirth. Tomorrow at 9 on 90.7 WFAE.
Do you love Charlotte Talks? Do you wish it was on the air at a time that was more convenient for you to listen, like noon or maybe 3:30 on a Saturday? Well, we've got a solution. Try the Charlotte Talks podcast. You'll hear Mike Collins explore the stories that matter with experts, politicians, and voices from the Charlotte community, all when it works for you. Subscribe to the Charlotte Talks podcast at WFAE.org/podcast to stay informed and engaged on all things Charlotte and the region.
Recent conflicts in Ukraine, Iran, and Lebanon are changing how war is fought. Cheap drones do damage that once required multi-million-dollar weapons. Robots take territory without soldiers on the ground, and the biggest defense budgets don't guarantee the fastest innovations. What does the future of warfare look like, and is the U.S. ready? Next time on 1A.
You can catch the latest episode of 1A at 10 on 90.7 WFAE.
It's Charlotte Talks on listener-funded 90.7 WFAE and WFHE. I'm Mike Collins. So let's talk about what we were going to talk about from the get-go this morning, and that is food and how it builds relationships. Eating with other people builds connections. It helps us find commonalities. It's a shared experience, more meaningful than just the food itself, but it appears we are beginning to lose those connections because more of us are eating alone. The World Happiness Report. You didn't know we had one, did you? A worldwide annual publication measuring and comparing well-being across more than 140 countries using data from the Gallup World Poll calls sharing meals an exceptionally strong indicator of subjective well-being on par with income and unemployment. But it has found clear evidence that Americans are spending more and more time dining alone, with roughly 1 in 4 of us reporting eating all of our meals alone on the previous day, and that's up 53% from 2003. Today, we look at the ramifications of that, the role food plays in building social connections, and what's at risk as this ancient habit has started to fade. We'll also touch on some new places to continue those traditions as our food scene in Charlotte grows. Ashli Stokes is with us. She is a professor of community studies at UNC Charlotte and the author of Consuming Identity, the Role of Food in Redefining the South. She's here along with Kris Reid, chef and executive director of Slow Food USA. And Kristen Wile is editor of the Charlotte-based digital publication Unpretentious Palate. All three are returning champions to this program. Welcome. Welcome back.
Thanks, Mike. Thank you so much for having me, Mike.
You're welcome. Ashli, let me start with you. Ironically, the first time you were on this program, you probably don't remember this, in 2017, it was the day after Lyle's upset Jennifer Roberts in the Democratic primary, and now you're back as Mayor Lyle's replacement is announced. But that's a sidebar issue. You have researched and written a lot about food and the South and what food means to the South and how food has helped to define the South. But is the role of food in our culture really that different from region to region?
So I thank you again for having me. I think that every region in our country and every region globally has key indicators of maybe dishes they like or practices that they use when cooking. But I think that what's interesting about the South is that, despite, we're on to a different mayoral term, despite how much Charlotte has changed over the last 20 years since I've lived here, I think that there's still sort of commonalities and certain things that we look for and can talk about in the South that may differ from other regions of the country.
Have people in the South done a better job of preserving what we're going to be talking about, the idea of eating as a communal event as opposed to eating alone, more so than other parts of the country? And I ask because you see food not just as a source of sustenance, but as a sort of communication medium.
Yes, right. So I'm a professor of communication studies. And so my field studies things like interpersonal communication, health communication, organizational communication. But we also study rhetoric. And a lot of people think that means sort of hot air or sort of misinformation. But really what it means is how we talk about food and how we persuade sort of the language and symbolic choices that we share when we talk with each other. And food really does a lot of work in terms of crafting our messages, how we identify with each other, how we relate with each other. And I think some of the things that are interesting about eating in the South is that we do have, a lot of different types of eating organizations, different places to eat, where we can have sort of an informal interaction, a more formal interaction, but we have places that we can kind of exchange sort of taste, flavors, and memories. And by doing so, we share a little bit about ourselves, and we share a little bit about the ways that we might connect with someone. So, for example, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say that, if you ever had the chance to go to Price's Chicken back in the day before it closed, you get your chicken and then you go sit outside. And it's that sort of informal area where, you're sitting outside, you're tasting something, but you might be able to talk with somebody about what you're eating. That's a very different experience that you might have, for example, going to our newly Michelin-starred restaurant like The Counter. We're sort of setting up different types of interactions.
So, Kris, talk about the traditional role that food plays in human culture and relationships. How did it become, and why has it become so important? Why is eating together something special, although something that we should do all the time, so it shouldn't be so special? And why do almost all of our cultural milestones, weddings, graduations, funerals, job promotions, you name it, all of them are usually associated or take place around food?
Thanks for having me, Mike. Those are a lot of questions. We could write a book on all of that. I would say that food is one of our very last sort of commonalities as humans. It's the one thing we all have to do every day. We may disagree on politics and religion and ideology, but every single day people have to eat. And I think that the rise of eating alone is not a food story, it's a community story. And I think together we're deciding what that community story is going to be. I think in terms of your point around bringing people together around food and the different interactions around food, food has always been, for me, one of the most durable memories that I have. The recipes of my families are more than instructions. They're stories of my family, and I think that a lot of people feel that way, and so it gives people a sense of belonging. I believe to share food, cook food, and eat together. But food is certainly it's about relationships and belonging, and certainly civic infrastructure. We can talk about infrastructure in terms of roads and buildings and bridges, but there's a social equivalent here when it comes to food spaces that really strengthens or weakens community. So I think where we're at right now in terms of its importance is really critical in bringing people together.
But what is it about food? I mean, we meet at PTA meetings. People meet each other at church. They meet each other.
You have to eat, Mike.
Well, yeah. But
you got to eat, right? You got to eat.
Okay. Ashli, Megan Elias, who is the director of food studies, the food studies program at Boston University, says that sharing a sensory experience over a meal can make other people seem more real to us. I guess that's what we risk when we eat alone a lot. In an American culture where loneliness appears to be on the rise, and where alienation and violence is rampant, could this be one of the root causes? Other people become more abstract because we're not eating with them?
I would say that food allows you to really kind of display parts of relationships, display parts of yourself that you don't even really have to say a word, right? So that if we're in an exchange together over a meal, the type of drink that we order, the way that we may be seated with others, the conversations that we have around food might allow us to kind of get to know each other and build sort of that realness, to use your word, in ways that maybe is more difficult if we're talking about things like politics or work. So that we've done interviews with some of the people for our books, and they say things like, I had a taste of this and it really brought me back to when I was a child, or it really reminded me of my grandmother or my grandfather, whatever. And then someone else will say, Well, that's similar to what I had, but I had a different taste, and the recipe in my family did something else. And it's that sort of exchange that I think is sort of easier stakes sometimes. It lets us involve, more sort of approachable, I think, relational aspects with each other that may create kind of that room to build relationships. So I think we risk losing that if we're not working on that kind of
And,
exchange.
and we're also living in a culture that is increasingly angry and one looking for solutions and one in which people are now willing to turn against democracy to find these solutions. The World Happiness Report, hearkening back to that, says that people who are more connected to each other are more trusting of others and have more faith in institutions, while the absence of those social ties has been linked to higher rates of disease, shorter life expectancies, lower levels of subjective well-being, higher rates of criminality, and greater support for authoritarianism. All this connected to food. Do you see, Ashli or Kris or Kristen, do you see this rise in eating alone as part of this rising anger and resentment? Or,
I think, Mike,
in other
that the
words,
meal,
chicken or the egg? Chicken or the egg?
um, I think the meal is asking us to do something. A meal is asking us to sit, to listen, to share, and be together, which can be very uncomfortable for people who don't agree, right? When you talk about trust, I've been on your show before, and Kristen and Ashli know me well from this community in terms of my local food advocacy, and now I do that at the national level. But really, the important exchange that's happening around food, like at a farmer's market, is not money, or in a restaurant money. It's relationship, it's trust, right? And I think that trust has been largely eroded in some communities, but that food can be the weaver that brings that back together. So I feel that when we are thinking about a meal or sharing a meal or encouraging people to join us for a meal, we're asking for them to do something. We're asking for them to sit and listen and share and slow down. And that can be uncomfortable in today's society.
Yeah, Kristen, Wile.
Yeah, I think something else we're seeing is just a disconnect on so many levels of the food chain. We've had conversations about this all the time, but in restaurants, for example, people wanting to order fish, but they don't want a whole fish because they don't want to see that it was an animal, right? They want it without the head, they want the fillet. And so when you're removing yourself from the creation of food and these processes, and the understanding of every person that went into helping put something on a plate, you're really stripping it of like the humanity and the sharing of that food with you. It just becomes a transaction. And so I think in the economy we're in, the culture we're in, the factory foods that we live in, we've kind of lost that piece of this is all from the earth and this is grown by people in our community or another human. It could even be far away, but it's someone is picking that tomato in Florida for you. So that piece of it too, I think, has really just made food something that we have to do, and we've forgotten that feeding one another is a community effort.
Well, and healthy systems are healthy relationship systems, to that point, Kristen, right?
Yeah. So because there is this rise, allegedly, of dining alone, I Googled the term dining alone. And the first thing that came up was this paragraph, Kristen. Dining alone is the ultimate act of self-care, allowing you to eat exactly what you want, when you want, without compromising or rushing. It is a liberating experience that lets you savor your meal at your own pace while enjoying your own company. That is exactly the opposite of what we've been talking about. Your thoughts?
So I think if for somebody who sees food as a hobby, that is very true. If you see food as an art to be experienced, that's a very specific style of dining, right? You're going there because you want to appreciate the techniques, you want to see the chef's creativity. And I think that can be a communal experience when you're going with someone who shares that same hobby, right? Like, I'm not going to go watch sports with Kris and Ashli and be really bonding with them because that's just not what I'm into. I'll be there for them, but it's going to be a different experience from fans all going together. So I think if you're seeing food in that light, then it is true. I love to go sit at a bar and interact with a bartender and build a different kind of community that way. I think that's something that we're missing in this conversation a bit. Is there are several bartenders that, like, I will go specifically to bars and sit there so I can see them and chat with them and see what they're up to and hear about their lives. And so to me, that's dining alone, but it's not, because I'm building community with people just on the other side of the bar. But I do think for that reason, I don't know that dining alone is always a bad thing if you're doing it for the art. But I think we're just also busy that sometimes it's just a box to check, and we're losing so much of the reason behind sharing a meal and building that community and sharing food with one another.
And I would just to add on to that, do you want to go ahead?
No, go ahead.
I was going to say that I think there's a difference in giving people sort of permission to focus on a meal and enjoy it by themselves and really think about a particular flavor or texture or where, a particular chef that they're trying to frequent, versus, when you're eating together for a purpose or for, trying to build a relationship. There's studies that say that management, if they've got two people trying to agree on a wage to pay someone, and there's a study that shows if they gave them the same kind of food in the interaction, they were much more, they're quicker in agreeing at what the wage was, the rate was, and if you serve them different snacks, it took them longer to get there. So I think it kind of depends on their purpose and what you're trying to do.
Despite the fact that eating together is a social event that builds connections and makes us healthier, etc., this dining alone thing, the second that when I Googled dining alone, I just read the first thing that popped up. The second thing that popped up was the best places to dine alone in Charlotte. Is that an indication, Kris, that this is a trend that is picking up speed, that people want this?
I'm listening to this and I'm thinking about something too, Mike, like when we talk about alone versus loneliness, right? Because like it's the loneliness that causes this disruption to our nervous systems and causes this imbalance in our health. So it's like loneliness is not just an absence of the people, right? Like to your point, Kristen, going to the bar and hanging out with mixologists and chatting, but it can be this maybe an absence of belonging. And I think that that's something that needs to be explored. In terms of the restaurants that are, good places to dine alone, I'm just thinking about it in terms of loneliness versus alone, because I'll choose to go out to eat alone and enjoy a nice meal in Charlotte. And I have places that I really like to do that. But I think when we talk about the health implications and the community implications, that's loneliness. I just wanted to make sure that we're talking about the same thing.
I mean, some people may find themselves dining alone, either at home or at a restaurant, merely out
Sure.
of convenience or speed. We have to eat,
Sure.
we're busy, let's do it, let's get back to work. Eating alone is
Yeah.
quicker than finding somebody to go out to eat with. But we also have people dining alone because they have no other options. So what do you think is leading to more people eating alone in our culture? Kristen, I know you wanted to talk. Go ahead.
Yeah, this kind of goes back to something that Ashli had mentioned about prices, right? We all loved prices, that experience of you wait in line with so many people and you grab your chicken, you find a seat outside, you got your box. But now I think food has become something to show off a bit. And it's like that chicken's probably going on Instagram today before you're talking to anybody around you. If it were still in place today, I imagine that there would be a lot of, young people out there taking stories, posting photos, and not actually taking the time to get to know one another. So I do think that there's this shift in, and Charlotte specifically tends to be this way. Like everybody wants to be the first to experience something. Everybody wants to be the first to show something off. And so we're really losing the discussion about it instead of just like, this is what I've done, check me out.
And if you're taking pictures of the food, you're not talking.
Exactly.
You're taking pictures of your food. We have to take a break. We'll come back and talk more about the implications of eating alone and the positives of eating together when we return at Charlotte Talks.
Coming up at 10, cheap drones do damage that once required multi-million-dollar weapons. Robots take territory without soldiers on the ground. And the biggest defense budgets don't guarantee the fastest innovations. What does the future of warfare look like? And is the U.S. ready? Next time on 1A.
I'm Mary Louise Kelly.
And I'm Steve Inskeep.
One of the things you can count on from NPR and this station, we've got your back when it comes to reporting the news.
And one thing this station counts on is contributions to keep it going.
A really easy way to support this station is donate a vehicle you don't need anymore.
It's free to you and could be worth hundreds of dollars in support. Thanks.
Learn more at wfae.org/cars.
Support comes from WFAE listeners and the Backyard Care Company, providing mosquito control and lawn fertilization services designed with the health and well-being of kids, pets, and pollinators in mind. More about Backyard Care services at backyardcare.com. And Robertson and Associates. Founded in 1996, Robertson and Associates helps to provide both general business advice and legal solutions through business, construction, and real estate litigation. More at rlrobertson.com. This is 90.7 WFAE.
It's Charlotte Talks on listener-funded 90.7 WFAE and WFAE.org. We're talking about dining together and alone, the positives and the negatives. Ashli Stokes is with us. She's a professor of communications at UNC Charlotte and author of Consuming Identity, the Role of Food in Redefining the South. Kris Reid is here, chef and executive director of Slow Food USA. And Kristen, Wile, editor of the Unpretentious Palate. We live today in this politically divided nation. We hear anecdotal stories, Ashli, about people around holiday time, around Thanksgiving, not wanting to go to dinner because Uncle Bob is going to be there, and Uncle Bob has a completely different political point of view than I do, and I don't want to hear it, and I certainly don't want to ruin Thanksgiving by getting into a knockdown, drag-out argument about politics. Is our politics causing more of us to move away from these collective dining traditions, and could engaging in those traditions and sitting through Uncle Bob and trying to understand Uncle Bob while enjoying the turkey actually help repair the damage?
One thing I would say is that those experiences can be very challenging for a lot of reasons. And I think what food might be able to do in those is to give you something else to talk about. So that if we are talking about the way that Aunt Sue makes her turkey, or why someone else puts, fried onions on top of the green bean casserole or whatever, you're sort of, again, I think, maybe moving away from some of those topics that might be sort of initially tense or stressful, so that you're sort of putting yourself in a environment where you can slowly think about relationships and work on those kinds of things rather than jumping into the hot topics, so to speak.
And Kris, your whole movement, Slow Food, is not just a move away from fast food and sitting there and enjoying the meal and taking time to prepare it intentionally. It is taking the time to be with others and have these conversations. If we have these conversations over Thanksgiving or Christmas turkey, can we get beyond our political differences? Can we find a way to tamp down the anger, at least just for that meal, and find something good to talk about?
I do this experiment every week when I'm not traveling for work, and it's called Open House. And I just open my house up, I advertise it on social media, and I encourage people to come over and just enjoy some time around the table. And the people that show up are typically from very different walks of life, different belief systems, different political views. And I'm doing it because I think that right now, especially leading this movement in the United States, in tandem with the amazing work that's happening at the chapter level, the forces that are pulling us apart as community, there's this opportunity to bring food together at the center of our health, not just our physical health or our spiritual health, but our environmental health, our economic health, and really looking at food at the center of what can make community healthy again. And so, we can use this experience to, again, sit and listen and share and slow down. And I think that that's the power of food, the power of the table. It really is the last place that I feel we can practice community. And I think that's critical right now, that we're doing that very intentionally for the blueprint of humanity.
Something else is happening that may be driving people away from the dinner table or from eating together or having a big feast for everybody you like in your family or your neighborhood, Kristen, and that is the fact that food has become really expensive in the last year or so. I mean, a single plastic bag of groceries, which doesn't hold very much, can set you back $50 or $60 like that. What is the impact of that on having these social gatherings around food. What is the impact of that on dining out, for that matter, Kristen? Because if it's expensive in the grocery store, it's more expensive in a restaurant.
Yeah, this is something that people ask me what I'm concerned about in the restaurant scene, and this is it. I think we're rapidly losing a group of people that can afford an independent casual restaurant, and we're splitting into dining as experiences versus fast food casual dining, fast casual dining, because there's either you can afford a very high-end dinner, or you can't really afford going out to eat. And we're really losing that middle ground. And then you add in the restaurant operation side, where it's just getting harder and harder to have a profitable restaurant that you're not charging a lot of money for. And so I think this is definitely part of it. People can't afford to go out to these fancy sit-down restaurants. It's, if you do, you're going to a steakhouse for a celebration, and that's your special going out night for the year, or you go out for birthdays and that's it. So I think it's becoming, instead of something that was joyful for a lot of people, it's becoming more of a stressor. And I think that's definitely a big issue that we're going to be facing in terms of even families. Money isn't the only resource that we're short on right now, is time as well. I feel like, as a single mom, it's like, if I can feed everybody something remotely healthy, I have something with my 6-year-old where I was like, what's the most local thing on our plate? And if I can say something's local on our plate every night, I feel like that's a win. But then there are other nights where it's just, everybody needs to be fed, period. And so I think as a community, we got to prioritize both the community and the health aspect of it.
And I know you can't fight the economics of it. The economics are what they are. And when you go to a fancy steakhouse, we won't mention any names, you expect, and you always have expected, to pay a lot of money for that piece of meat, and everything is a la carte. But to go out for a plate of spaghetti and meat sauce should not set you back $28, and that's what it's doing now. So that's shutting a lot of people out, right?
I think we got to be careful on the shoulding. I think that when we start shoulding everything, that's a challenge, especially when we're talking about people's businesses and livelihoods. The food cost right now, Mike, and the expense of running a business has been exorbitantly high, especially since the pandemic. And this is a real challenge in terms of like, how do we do the ethos and values of slow food, where we believe that everyone deserves food that's good for their body, good for the environment, and, fair to the people that are producing it. This is a real challenge because all of those practices cost money. But certainly in a restaurant environment where people feel that they're getting gouged, they don't understand the margin that these chefs are dealing with in terms of their rising labor costs, overhead expenses, and then definitely their food costs. And especially when we add back in that local component, because local food systems often are more expensive than commodity food purchasing. So the chefs and the restaurants that are really trying to do that local piece to elevate their local food scene and to have that time and place on the plates that they're serving, to connect people and give that sense of belonging, costs an extreme amount of money that most consumers do not understand once that food is processed and put on your plate.
Kristen.
Yeah, just to follow up on what Kris was saying, I think we have, as consumers, we'll look at a plate and we'll say, this would have cost me this much at the grocery store, and not consider all of the staff costs. The rent in Charlotte is going skyrocketing right now. And so utilities are getting more expensive. Everything within a restaurant is getting more expensive as well. And so, this is one of the things where dining out is no longer just about the food. It's an entire experience, and you're paying for an experience. I don't think it was always necessarily that way. It was going out to eat was just a different way of getting food in your belly, and spending time with people. Nobody has to cook. Someone's doing the dishes for you. But now it's just, everything is so expensive from the restaurant standpoint that you need to consider dining out as an experience and not a mandatory.
And something else caused by the pandemic that is still going on in many cases is people using a restaurant for takeout, a restaurant that was never intended to be a takeout restaurant. And the problem with that is, although it may be convenient for you, you're not sticking around having a cocktail before the meal or a cup of coffee after the meal or dessert. You're picking up the dinner and leaving. How good or bad, Kris, is that, or Kristen, for restaurants?
I think that it's very taxing on restaurants, and more important than being taxing on restaurants, I think it's taxing on our environment in terms of to-go products and waste management. I think that it's, when we look at the full food cycle, it's totally outside of what is in balance. when we produce that kind of waste, but also when we're producing more opportunity for people to dine alone, right? Like we need to create more third spaces where people feel like they want to sit and be part of a meal. But in terms of restaurants having to produce to-go meals to meet the cultural demand, I think that it's really, the pricing is very exorbitant for packaging, especially when they're looking at sustainable packaging at this point.
And Ashli, you say that you spoke to a restaurateur who told you that since the pandemic, they don't have regulars anymore, people that came every week or once every couple of weeks. What is the impact of that on our food scene here in Charlotte, or are using restaurants as gathering places to build social bonds?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that happens is that, food can kind of provide a sense of regional, city, national identity. I think you see it a lot in the World Cup coverage right now and what people are eating. And this is sort of going against kind of the values of slow food and local food. But I do think it's important to point out that, people are excited about Waffle House when they come to visit us from other countries. They're excited about these in-person experiences they're having at Buc-ee's or whatever. And, that's not exactly the type of food that we have. But in Charlotte, I think when you have that sort of local experience and you can talk about it with somebody else, it kind of gives us a sense of us as a city. And so I think what we risk when we don't offer, is it a special, Krispy Kreme donut, but that it's locally made. I mean, I think people need something to talk about, and we risk if it's, not, if everything's takeout, we don't have that chance to kind of bond over what we have and can experience together.
Some people choose to dine out with friends and relatives, and some people choose to have those people into their homes to dine out. Is there a difference in that experience? Is one better than the other for building social connections, Ashli?
I mean, I wouldn't say one is better than the other. I think the important thing to do is just for people to talk about what they're eating. I think recipes are connective threads. It gives you a place to, whether you're in a restaurant or not, I make it this way. How do you make this? Have you ever had this before? What would you do differently? And so I think, again, it's sort of that give and take, whether it's in home or not. Obviously they're going to give you different sorts of experiences. You're going to have probably a more relaxed experience in a home than you would if you're going to dine at a country club or something like that, or one of our fine dining establishments in Charlotte.
But if you're going to dine in a home, you might also help with the preparation of something. You might help toss the salad or something, and you're not going to do that in a restaurant. Is that in other words, does that build stronger connections?
I think the ability to participate in a ritual is really important. And so whether it is, you're helping the chef or the cook, rather, if you're in the home in the kitchen, or you're loading the dishes, that you are participating in sort of the rhythms of that experience. And then again, it gives you something to talk about how you may or may not do it the same way. So I think that the importance of ritual really stands out there, that, it gives you a space to kind of reflect maybe and talk about it.
I think on top of that, Ashli, when we really think about kitchens and dining room tables in a home versus a restaurant, that when we look back on our young lives, that really was one of our first classrooms, right? That is one of the first places that you really learn about your culture and learn to listen and care about your environment. And it's where we also learn empathy. And so I feel like at least my experience has been that. So I think at home, that environment, when you're cooking together and being together, isn't just about the family tradition that you might want to share with your community to carry that cultural piece forward, but also this space that does actually lend itself to really being empathetic and listening and building an understanding of the transfer of skill and knowledge.
Kristen, prior to the pandemic, this was my impression that Charlotte's food scene was really taking off. It was growing by leaps and bounds. New restaurants were opening all the time of different price points and different experiences. But since the pandemic, it kind of put a big dent in all of that. It broke habits of dining out. It slowed people's exploration of what Charlotte has to offer in our growing food scene. But you go out, so what are we missing?
What are we missing as a city as a whole?
Well, if you stopped your habit of dining out and exploring new options, and you've missed some of these new places that have opened in the interim, what are we missing?
Got it. So I think of national concepts coming in. Charlotte's a super hot market for out-of-town concepts, but there's also been this really cool pop-up scene evolving in Charlotte. On the flip side of that, where you have super talented chefs that either have food trucks or just pop up at bars or a lot of wine bars, and they're starting to gain a following. And I think this is a really cool community being built because there are these fans of these chefs that are only popping up every now and then. El Veneno is one of them. Michael Lee, who has Hello Uncle, they are doing a great job of building their own followings, a community around their food that kind of go from bar to bar with them. And so I think that's been a really cool thing that if you haven't been following, you should check out.
And I'm wondering if Charlotte has a food identity. The TV show Top Chef just produced its last season here in Charlotte, and it started by having chefs cook at Charlotte Motor Speedway, focusing on barbecue, later on hog cooking and local produce, very Southern, not very Charlotte. And it featured a few of our restaurants. Duke's Mayonnaise was featured. But the show was also shot in Greenville, South Carolina, before returning here for their final episode in the competition. It was almost as though Charlotte didn't have enough to offer, so they had to extend their reach. Did they look hard enough, Kristen?
So I wouldn't say that's why they split it that way. I think when you do a show like Top Chef, there's a lot of narratives and different types of storytelling. But I thought they did a good job of representing Charlotte. I mean, Charlotte has such a variety. We're such a melting pot. And there are so many people from all over that Charlotte's food identity is sometimes lost when people come from elsewhere. I mean, I'm from upstate New York, so I'm guilty of trying to find New York pizza, but we also need to embrace what was Charlotte and what was here. And I think for us to build that food identity, we need to be seeking out like Fish Camp Fare is something that I think I spoke to Joe and Katie Kindred, who own Hello Sailor, and we were talking about, fried catfish maybe should be Charlotte's signature dish, but you don't have enough people that are trying to embrace that history yet.
But we don't really have that's the thing about our culture here in Charlotte is not that we have an identity of a single dish, but that we have multiple traditions, cultures, and communities around. We have a food scape. We have a food landscape, I like to say, right? Not a food scene. I think it's more of a food landscape.
Okay, and with that, we have to stop because we are plumb out of time. That last person's voice was that of Kris Reid, chef and executive director of Slow Food USA. Kristen Wile was here, editor of the Unpretentious Palate, and Ashli Stokes, professor of communications at UNC Charlotte and author of Consuming Identity, The Role of Food in Redefining the South. Thank you all for the hour.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Charlotte Talks is a production of 90.7 WFAE. Support for Charlotte Talks comes from Mazda of South Charlotte.